I have a question for you, and it's a hard one to ask, and it may be harder to answer. Are we ready to honor the story and the history of victims rather than the victors? Today is a small expression of our efforts as we see slowly emerging. It's only one step in the beginning of an apology for the wrongs done upon an Indigenous people of this very land. Apologies have to be more than words. Apologies are a process of recognition, and it starts with listening and taking ownership of misdeeds. Because without contrition, there is no merit to the words. It's just more hollow dialogue. Before the collective we can really offer an apology, we need to know the real stories from the legacies themselves about what harm has been done. It is often too uncomfortable to listen to the crimes that we dismiss, ignore, or excuse, offering trite comments like, "I didn't do that." Well, no, the current we did not slaughter, enslave, pollute, waste, and intentionally inflict illness on the Native Americans, but our ancestors did. And it is because we took this land that we have the privileged lives that we do. But know that that privilege is rested on bloodied soil of those who came before us. We stand upon land that was stolen, exploited, and holds the souls of those who once lived in harmony with it. As Christians, with the values of loving God and loving our neighbors, we are called in this moment to hear and hold the truth, as painful as it may be. We owe our ears to hear the narrative of the victims and those who lived with the rhythms of the land as the essence and foundation of their existence. Through telling and listening, we allow for the germination of seeds for healing to happen. Today, we are blessed with one of our own, Greg Graves, who is the Assistant Dean for Student Affairs and Associate Director of Native American Culture.
Thank you for allowing me to share. Good morning, my name is Greg Graves, and we've been members since my wife took our twins to an Easter sunrise ceremony with Jim Keck. So that's been a while. I'm an enrolled member of the Delaware tribe of Western Oklahoma. I look a lot more like my German grandfather than my native grandfather. And you say, Delaware and Oklahoma? Well, we call ourselves the Lanai Lenape. And our territory was southern New York, Delaware, and Pennsylvania. In 1611, an Englishman, Lord de la Ware, sailed up the river, landed his ships, and discovered the land. He named it after himself. And oh, by the way, you Indians here, you're Delaware too. So the Lenape were pushed further and further west as more and more settlers moved in, and finally tossed into Oklahoma, which was called Indian Territory. Melissa asked me to give a fuller perspective on California Native history. Now, Native history is contested space. As Tony Robbins says, no matter how thin you slice it, there are always two sides. Most history is written by the victors, and only recently have Native voices been able to be heard. It's been estimated that California was the home to more than 1 million Native Americans before the Spanish arrived in 1769. By the 1920s, less than 20,000 remained. That's a huge drop. The peninsula and most of the Bay Area was home to the Muwekma Ohlone tribe. The Muwekma have been here for thousands of years. In their oral tradition, they talk of walking to the Farallon Mountains. Well, it's the Farallon Islands now because the glaciers have gone and the sea levels have risen. Pre-contact, the Muwekma respected and lived in harmony with the land. The land was abundant. Salmon and steelhead ran up every creek. Deer and elk roamed the hills. The oak trees were heavy with acorns. In her book, which I believe a number of us have read, Braiding Sweetgrass, Robin Wall Kimmerer writes about how the Indians never harvested all of the plants. They gave thanks for what they needed and left enough to reseed for the next year. They never did clear cut. Traditionally, Indians love the earth and believe the earth loves them back with her bounty. Accumulating money, land, and power was a foreign concept to the Muwekma, and the foreigners rolled right over them. There are three impactful periods for California natives. First was the mission system. Father Huniparosera, he's up on 280 there, and other Jesuit missionaries founded the California mission systems. Our fourth grade history lessons teach us that the gentle fathers sought to civilize and Christianize the Indians. Well, the Indians were civilized by being forbidden to speak their language, practice their traditional culture. Families were broken up. Men were put in one barracks, women in another, and children in a third. The soldiers were happy to guard the women's barracks. Indians actually ended up being the labor that built those mission buildings. They tilled the fields and herded the cattle. At the height, the missions owned over 150,000 head of cattle. Most of the Muwekma were scooped up by Mission Santa Clara and Mission San Jose. Gold Rush was also a very difficult period, as tens of thousands of gold seekers poured in. The Indians were pushed out of their homelands. Market hunters decimated the deer and the ducks. Creeks and rivers were polluted. Redwood City was the port that all the clear-cut redwoods came down to the bay and were shipped to San Francisco to build San Francisco. Now, when California became a state, it got worse. Peter Burnett, the first governor of California, stated that a war of extermination will continue to be waged between the races until the Indian race is extinct. Must be expected, and while we cannot anticipate the result, but with painful destiny, the inevitable destiny of the race is beyond the power or wisdom of man to avert. Now, cities and counties offered bounties. In fact, in the California Constitution, there were bounties on Native peoples. Killing Indians was often easier and more profitable than gold mining. So the state paid for it, and to get paid for the state, you had to request a reimbursement. You had to submit receipts. The 1850 Act for Government and Protection of the Indians made Indians ineligible to become citizens, vote, or testify in court. One of the most painful clauses was vagrancy. Indians who were not productively employed could be arrested for vagrancy. Well, to pay off their fine, they were sold as indentured servants. Young men were worth about $20. Young women were worth $200. In 1925, the famous Berkeley anthropologist Kroeber declared the Muwekma extinct for all practical purposes. They no longer spoke their indigenous language. They had Spanish names and worked as farm and ranch hands instead of traditional hunting and foraging. The history has been full of many ugly and brutal events. However, the Muwekma are still here as a people and a tribe. The tribe has traced their ancestry back through mission records, and they're working to regain federal recognition. With the help of Berkeley linguists, they have restored their Chochenyo language, which had been dead. They are teaching their kids to recreate a living language, not just a dictionary. They taught their children Christmas carols in Chochenyo. That's like, oh. And the tribe has worked with Stanford to remove the name of Junipero Serra from the Stanford campus. So the Muwekma are still here, they're still a people, still a tribe, and still a living organization.
Thank you. Maybe you're not familiar with the fact that Christianity has a history in mysticism, that we were able to be one with the earth and the world and the spirits and the gentleness that's pervasive in our belief of a kind and loving God. Unfortunately, this gentle mysticism that belonged to Christianity was ignored and dismissed for one of domination in the name of salvation. The Christianity that has connected us all as beloved beings became silenced by the conquerors that hijacked Christianity as anything other than. And as we see so frequently in history, the oppressed become the oppressors, like those who settled on the eastern shores looking for religious freedom did not allow it when they found the indigenous people. What would have happened if on those shores Christianity brought its mysticism and syncopated itself with the existence of the indigenous? If only the gentle whispers of mysticism had held. If only the message of Jesus was not taken as permission to dominate and save those living peaceful lives. If only the body of Christ had grown through the language of love rather than fear, physical dominance, and deliberate genocide. If only the mission of Christianity was not salvation, but rather learning to love the diversity of God's creation and connection across the globe. If only Christians believed that the land was for existence, not for profit, we would be in harmony with the very environment that we stand on. If only we realize that salvation is not needed when you are one with the one, that feeling connected through the sunrises and sunsets, the stars and the moons, the seasons and the cycles in nature is really the connection to God. If only we had learned from the Muwekma, that living with the land and the plants and the animals is really the best way to love our God and love our neighbor. Amen.